Welcome back to the Comfy Chairs, a podcast from 123 Limited. This is Kate. Leading contains a fundamental tension, the constant pull between the organization's goals and the needs of the people who work there. Most leaders understand that their role is stretched between these two demands, and they may even strive to reach balance. Too many leaders, though, either don't acknowledge the inherent conflict of their role or simply fail to lead in a way that accounts for what can seem, on the surface, to be conflicting priorities. It's the question of profit versus people, and we don't really have a good answer. But what if there were a simple, single way to balance the demands of achieving goals and serving people that actually gets results for everyone? My guest today is a champion for human-centric teams and leadership, an approach we think can ensure leaders focus on the right priorities in the right ways and build high-performing, engaged teams. Welcome to the Comfy Chairs, Rachel. Thank you so much for joining me. I'd love to take a moment so that you can introduce yourself today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kate. I'm pretty excited to be here and have this conversation with you. I'm a fractional CMO at my own company, Pivot Studios, and also a leadership coach, someone who helps other organizations with their culture and management practices. And so, as part of that adventure, I really started, I think, 10 years ago or so down the path of management. I have had a lot longer in the corporate world and corporate life than that, but I started to really see how I wanted to engage with the world, and that was kind of the next natural step. And so off I went. And as I started to take all those experiences I had and really develop them into my own signature style, COVID happened, 2020, and
Yeah.
I had a really unique opportunity to say, I think the kind of person I want to be is someone who puts people first as a path to results. And so I'm going to try this really unique thing. And that was the very early aughts of what I now call human-centric leadership. And that's really the biggest part of my leadership coaching brand, is helping other organizations with their teams, with their culture, and kind of with their ideas about what it means to be successful.
Well, thank you so much. I love that moment of reflection, the self-reflection and the who do I want to be. I
Yeah.
think that's so important. I was actually reviewing some notes from prior episodes and had a very similar conversation with a gentleman toward the end of last year about that. Am I going to look back and be pleased with what I've done? Is who I am right now the person I want to be? How do I make that happen? And the answer that you've come up with, I don't know if there's a better answer, Rachel.
I mean, I like the answer that I've come to.
Good.
Yeah, but yeah, I know a lot of people that don't have an opportunity to
Mm-hmm.
consciously choose
Yeah.
the path that they're on. And um, I think we should just dive right in and get personal here. But
I love it. Love it. Go.
I've been thinking a lot about this weirdly recently. I think because I have a big birthday coming up next year, turning another decade.
I have
Yep.
one next week, so yes.
Okay. Oh my gosh. Okay. Yes. There you go. So, I've just been thinking about, like, this moment I had a couple years ago of just
Mm-hmm.
realization in the larger scheme of life of, like, what even is the goal of what I'm trying to achieve? And do I want that?
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that is not afforded to a lot of people
Yeah.
if you're not consciously thinking about it, right? Which is sort of a habit and behavior on its own. And so I think it's a really fantastic place to be as a leader, as a human, to be able to take a step back and just ask yourself, okay, I'm on a path. Everybody's on a path. Is it the one I want? Does it take me to where I actually want to go?
Mm-hmm.
I love that guest was really starting to think about that.
Yeah. It was a good conversation. We were actually talking about fear and how it can lead to growth. And
It,
fear is one of those things that I don't think we embrace quite enough because it's just part of being human. I
yeah.
also I think the question of the privilege of being able to pause and ask yourself questions like, who do I want to be? Well, one, it is a privilege. You're right. Not everyone
Mhm.
has that opportunity. I am going to make the bold connection, the statement that this human-centric, putting people first approach is a way to make that more readily available for all, though.
Mm.
So I'm going to steer us toward
Yeah.
my first prepared question. Human-centric, the meaning of it seems pretty self-evident. It's right there in the word itself. And I always like to start with defining our terms. So
Mhm.
that's my first question for you is when you say human-centric or human-centered, what do you mean?
I have grappled with that question a lot in the last 2 years. I did not have a word and definition for the thing I was doing in testing when I
Okay.
first started. And as this current year has gone on, this has been several years that I've been doing this and then developing this, right?
Yeah.
So this current, or excuse me, 2024, I've already forgotten that it's a new year. In 2024, the beginning of 2024, I really started to try and think about like, but what does it mean? And
Mhm.
is it a leadership style or is it just a thing that you do? Is it a mindset? And trying to figure out how to best help other people understand it so that they can do it themselves. And this is where I've landed. Um, the definition I've given human-centric leadership is the growth and development of the individual over the organization while on the path to results. So, the reason that I think this is a really important definition in the order that it is that it's both based on data, it's based on science of the biology of our cells, and it's also
Mhm.
based on a balancing of the scales for the structure with which we work. So, data meaning a whole conversation we could have about what the actual statistics say of what makes people good workers. Um, Biology, when people are having their basic needs met. So we almost touched on this, but like Maslow's
Yeah.
hierarchy, like when that is being met, they're able to do more incredible things.
Mhm.
And then the over the organization part is where I think a lot of leaders get really sticky. And the reason that that's in there is because the entity of an organization, a business, a for-profit fill in the blank, is already structured for that business organization to succeed. Even
Theoretically.
just
Yeah.
theoretically, yeah, okay, yeah, fair, fair. But theoretically, the structure of it should be set up
Mhm.
so it succeeds. And even as you're hired into a role, and in this case, I'll pick manager, a successful manager, according to an organization, is one who is able to achieve the goals set out for them.
Correct.
And those goals are typically revenue based. So if
Mhm.
you don't hit those revenue goals, then you are not successful. And it is just that simple. And so this definition for me is a balancing of that scale because now you're saying, I'm going to give people the priority while we choose the way that we accomplish the thing that will happen anyway. And that's where human-centric leadership is really more of a filter that you can put on top of a current leadership style that you have to employ within a certain context. And so that's really how I think of it as a concept, but then also the definition.
Mhm. I started this conversation with that question of there is this seeming contradiction between the prophet and the people. And
Mhm.
in the past, I've used the language double vision for this, the balancing the scales. We've talked about that great leaders, successful leaders, they are able to hold both the fact that this is a business, we're here to achieve a goal, most of them revenue based,
Mhm.
and we are a business made of people, so the people have to come first, that double vision allows for the balance that you're talking about. I've also seen the competency of paradox, being able to hold conflicting ideas in mind and be able to understand how they jive with each other. I mentioned to you that I'd had some extra thoughts, and I think this is where this fits in. It's the idea of surrogation. I used to work in healthcare, patient experience, survey results, very important metrics. And I spent a lot of time thinking as an organizational development person, an in-house consultant, about what is it that's preventing us from getting what we want. We're measuring all these things and we're still not meeting the measures, or we're putting in these plans and practices and we're not seeing the results that we want. What's the result we actually want? And that through that thinking, I had kind of come up with this idea that we don't quite understand what an indicator is. And as I was pulling these thoughts together, Better, Smarter People published a Harvard Business Review article on how metrics are kind of killing strategy. And there is a habit of, it's tempting to say failing, but I think some of it is we're not taught to think this way. But it is very common that people end up substituting the measure for the thing. For example, in patient experience, the likelihood to recommend, that net promoter score, very common measure. We focus on the number and forget about everything that it takes to get that number. And measures of success a lot of times become the main focal point, and we're not looking at what are the mindsets, the actions, the systems, the resources, the people that have to be in place. And I think that's the thing that happens in this debate between people and profit, that your profit is your indicator, that when I'm treating my people in a way that puts them at the center, that focuses on their growth and success, what logically begins to happen then is they're able to perform and we get results. So I should be checking that sign regularly, but it's not the thing that I'm actually doing. The language that came to me today is that a road sign for Dayton, where I live, that doesn't mean I'm in Dayton. It's the sign that I'm on the right path. And I think where we have to move is to begin teaching people, particularly leaders, to recognize that things like profit and net promoter and any other business metrics, they are your road signs that you're on the right path to your destination, which is your people. This is, I think, the core of the discussion I'd like to have. Originally I said, well, how does human-centric fit here? I think it's the same thing in two different languages. So for our conversation and for my listeners, I think talking about the skills and mindsets that leaders need to be effective here is going to be the most important thing. And because you coach this, I wanna dig through your brain and learn more.
This is a rich topic that you have brought up, and I love how you're framing some of these ideas. And my brain immediately went to a dozen different areas based on, these thoughts you have about indicators. And I think that that's a really wise way to think about some of the hurdles that we face in a modern business perspective for leaders and managers, which sometimes are the same thing, but not always. And so the first thing I want to start with is, as a marketer, I am very familiar with the entity of business seeing me as a cost center. I don't make money for the business, according to them. I only spend money. And so there's a lot of activities that are considered optional for a business, should they need to, cut back or be tighter with their budget and things like that.
Learning and development. I hear you.
Exactly. So you're very familiar, right? Typically it's what IT, HR, and marketing that are like, well, do we really need that or that much of that,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And so as I explain to smaller businesses, because I work a lot with series funded kind of, area of businesses, startups to series funded. Um, Marketing is the acceleration of sales or the amplification before sales.
Mm-hmm.
And so you're right. It's harder, I should say, to find the indicator that this marketing activity, whatever it is a direct line to output. And therefore, you have to think in a completely different way about how marketing is valued within an organization. So, marketing can be a powerful indicator for long-term growth. And in a similar long-term growth, meaning a lot of times what marketing does for these bigger businesses don't come to fruition for 3 to 6 months, depending on what business you're in and how robust and, are you a service or a product or whatever that looks like. So you sort of have to have this delayed gratification. And as I work with businesses in the coaching leadership realm,
Mm-hmm.
I see that there's a very similar mentality. And I think there's a lot of complexity to a simple answer of why that is. In the context here of, what are the skills and the mindset that they need and what are good indicators for managers, I would say that um, if you're thinking about people versus profits, a short-term mindset is to say, I have to make these numbers every quarter at any cost because that is what is defining my success.
Mm-hmm.
Versus all the data says that if we value or prioritize people in the path of those results, we have greater long-term success. And so now you're not just prioritizing, can I make this quarter? You're starting to prioritize, can I make every year? And so what does that look like? One great example is thinking about churn rate. So if you look at some of the current statistics around that, you'll see that 1 in 3 people leave a company every 2 years.
Mm-hmm.
And that in order to replace that person, so the cost to the business that does not include hiring new people, this is just replacing the people that you need right now to do the things that you do. It can cost them from 75% to 150% of that person's salary to replace them because you have to buy
Mm-hmm.
software to post, job descriptions. You need the recruiter's time to talk to people, and that time is money. And you need managers and peers and other people to interview, and that time is money. And then you have the loss of the time that there's no one in that role and what that
Yeah.
means to the rest of your people. And, and I could go on about the training costs. So it takes 4 months for you to get 100% of value once you do hire. And, there's all these things. And so businesses are looking at losing. So the numbers, if you are an average size business, which is about 100 people in the US, if you're at an average salary as an individual, which is about, I think, 63, 64K at the moment, and then you're looking at a full year of these statistics about churn and rehire and all that stuff. A business could spend up to $1 million per year simply replacing people.
It's amazing in a horrible
That's
way.
not, yeah, right. That's a staggering number. And so if you think about as a manager, okay, my team of 10 people is trying not to not only make this quarter, but this year, keep them there, keep them happy, investing in them, whatever that, suspending for a moment what we believe about what those things are to keep someone happy, you could essentially save the business hundreds of thousands of dollars by prioritizing the idea of what it means to be a good manager long term over just the quarter to quarter short term. And I think even that fundamental indicator is really a great place for people to start if they're thinking about leadership and management and how do I
Hmm.
really change a mindset for how to do this.
I agree. I think we have done such a bad job when it comes to management in defining the role and its priorities. And then, naturally, I have a bias here, but then in training people.
Mhm.
And we tend to focus on those very technical skills of Excel and spreadsheets and here's the systems. And we're not talking about how do you think about the work?
Mhm.
What are the mindsets that you need? I've I've been thinking for a number of years that when we orient new leaders, in fact, maybe all professional development should eventually focus on this, that the role is not necessarily skills training, it's teaching people how to learn more
Mm.
effectively. And again, I have a pretty obvious bias there as a learning and development professional. But if we can teach learning to people, critical thinking, even metacognition, think about how you
Mhm.
think, we create this ready platform for people to step up to those next levels of performance. And then it makes it easier to train things like customer service skills or delivering feedback, whatever the need is. But if
Mhm.
all of initial training in the workplace focuses on here's how we learn in our company,
Mhm.
it makes the other stuff fall into place. And I can see a connection from that approach to human-centric leadership and teams. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that.
I like a lot how you're thinking about this. And I think that that is a huge pro from that learning and development background. So I want to meet you there for a minute and talk about some of the evolution of how we've even gotten to this place.
Hmm.
Because one of the first things I typically do with um, leaders, managers, is make sure that they understand the basic meaning of what it is to be a manager. We see now, I think a recent statistic came out from Gartner a couple of weeks ago that said 85% of new managers have no formal training when they
Hmm.
become a manager. And so we have 85% of all leadership workforce that is basically learning on the fly.
Hmm.
And typically people get promoted in because they do a really great job at being an individual contributor. And that inherently is a completely different skill set than what it takes to be an incredible manager. Not
Yeah.
not one that can't be learned or taught, but being good at producing something or checking off your tasks or doing these projects does not inherently mean that you understand the socio-cognitive things that are involved with how humans work and how we can really help them. And so, if we think back to, I'll spare everyone the soliloquy about the evolution of management as a concept. But if we go back
We've
to
done that here before. So.
yeah, okay, great, great. But if we go back to even the 50s,
Hmm.
the opportunities to learn by observation, modeling behavior for managers, being in a consistent working environment where you can practice something over a long period of time in a safer environment, safe in this context being like people you've known a long time, right? There's
Hmm.
like a stability there. There's a proverbial bank account that you have put deposits in so that as you're learning the skills to be a manager, you can withdraw without severe penalty
Mm-hmm.
to the organization, to you, to the employee, right? There's this like longevity. And so we've had the ability years and years and years ago to sort of study and learn how to do this new skill by staying in the same place for 20 years, 30 years, 40-year careers
Yeah.
and slowly working on these things to become the manager, the leader. But now people are flipping careers every 2 years in a lot of industries.
Mm-hmm.
They're not staying in the same place. Their opportunities are maybe remote now, so they don't even have a moment to moment water cooler chat opportunity. And that is also, I think, really impacting how important a formalized training is going to become for the success of organizational leadership.
Mm-hmm.
And very similarly, I think you kind of touched on this too, and it's not normally my main thing, but I've weirdly been thinking a lot about this too. I think that the way new workers are coming into the workforce, so we're talking about, 20-year-olds,
Mm-hmm.
22-year-olds as they're
Yeah.
leaving high school in their trades and coming in, or graduating from college and coming in. They also know, I won't say no longer, but have a lot less that they've been able to observe about a more traditional, and in this case, I'm thinking you actually go into an office versus like a content creator, which is a different kind of work. That they've grown up now with this sort of like online presence of work, the side hustle culture, and they are not as familiar with what are the basic human connection skills I need to have in order to successfully navigate a weird group work project called corporate life
Mm-hmm.
or whatever context, right? So
Exactly.
I think you're making a really important observation that part of the solution for the manager query is potentially a solution to the working query, which is how do we give them these basic learning tools and make sure
Mm-hmm.
that they understand their place here and how to be a contributing member of this workforce within this cultural context.
Well, I think there's also, we have to think differently about leadership and how it is agnostic of title,
Mm.
too. That I'm all over the place with this. Let's see if I can
I'm already
corral
tracking, so I already
corral
love
the
it.
cat. But there's, so one, you talked about, if we look back 70, 80 years and some of the things that are very different, that we don't have this opportunity to be in the workforce the same place for 30 years, get your gold watch, retire.
Mhm.
That is not the way of the world anymore. Also, the types of jobs that are available are constantly changing and evolving. I just think about in our lifetime how
Mhm.
there are jobs now that didn't exist when we were born 50 years ago, in my case.
Mhm.
And that is only accelerating. So the solution isn't to keep doing things the way we've always done it and expect different results. It's to fundamentally change how we're doing this. And I personally think the solution is learning, uh, not just training in the workplace, but thinking differently about how we learn to work, and that we treat every worker like somebody who is leading, even if it's just themselves.
Mhm.
And that becomes a way to create autonomy, which feeds motivation, which feeds productivity. So if we're thinking of every job as something where people can learn first, lead second, and that then creates performance, it becomes this virtuous circle of growth and results for the people first, the business second.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. When you said, I think if we lead first, or no, learn first, lead second. It was like a little flower bloomed my core. It like
Yay.
was like, oh yeah, yeah, it was great. Yeah, I think you're right. I mean, so I am in the process of writing a book about human-centric leadership and what that means for us over time and for an individual and how you do that and all these things.
Mhm.
So I've been thinking a lot about, outside of do you understand what it means to be a manager, which I like to say it's just, I usually say it's like a little poop umbrella. You're just clearing out the things for your team and trying to keep it away so they can do their job. Like that's basically it, right? And so, outside of like understanding the basics, like what are the skills needed, the actual essential keys to be a successful human-centric leader, which is where I think the future of our leadership
Mhm.
should evolve towards, is using this filter as part of your leadership choices. And there's things on there like learning how to communicate, especially as it relates to expectations. There's things on there like learning how to be proficient in resolving conflict,
Mhm.
which is not a business specific or business siloed skill. That's just like a life skill.
It is.
Um,
Well,
and
and I'm going to rudely interrupt
yeah,
here. Also, not just resolving conflict, but allowing it where it's necessary too. So, facing
Mhm.
conflict and recognizing when it's productive and moving things forward and not just being averse to it or hoping that it's going to resolve itself.
yeah. It's interesting because about 15, 20 years ago, I had a job where I was very, very fortunate that they heavily prioritized individual development.
Hmm.
And my manager at the time kind of did the like year-end review thing, whatever, whatever. And she looked at me and she said, one of the number one things that you need to work on is how to handle conflict. Because I have not historically, being raised all the things like life things, had up until that point any opportunity to learn healthy conflict skills.
Mm.
It wasn't a thing. You just avoided it. It was something that you just peace. I'm a middle child. I'm a peacemaker, man.
Ah.
Like I don't like I just want everyone to be happy. It's like just let's just we can do it. Just ignore it and it'll be fine. And it was so uncomfortable for me. And here I was, even at that moment when she's giving me this feedback, thinking that I had already worked so hard to be better at it because that was just a thing I saw that was important with my friendships and was trying to be better at it. And then she gave me this feedback, and it felt just a little bit
Mhm.
crushing because I was like, man, I thought it was there.
Yeah.
And so then at that point, I really, really started to embrace conflict rather than just know how to resolve it, actually embrace it like you're talking about. And I was very fortunate that I had a very good friend of mine who I like to say she let me practice on her, which really just means we had a lot of reasons to need to practice talking about the things that were difficult. But honestly, it's one of those things where I think people assume that at some point conflict will be easy or no longer available or whatever the thing is. And we just see again and again that that's just never the case.
Mhm.
There's always going to be something that provides conflict. It could be conflict between an idea and a reality. It could be a conflict between what someone's being asked to do and what they personally feel is right or wrong. It could
Mhm.
be, yes, of course, between two people or a superior or whatever. And I think getting into a place as leaders, and then especially important, allowing your employees the freedom and safety to have the ability to express this conflict that they're feeling and make that a really normalized part of your team dynamic can be a critical element to human-centric leadership and also just a really healthy relationship of any kind. In this case, a working relationship or a relationship with an idea or an entity. But
Hmm.
it is, I would say, and I often tell people if I could tell managers any one thing to do, that's the thing I would tell them to do. Get good at conflict. And that could just mean be comfortable with conflict.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree on that actually, that a lot of well-meaning managers do a lot of ill because they will not embrace the fact that conflict
Mhm.
is it's going to be present. Period. End of
Yeah.
story. Because that's what happens when you get people together. I mean, for heaven's sake, you can have conflict with yourself. I don't even need another person to have conflict
Mhm.
in my life,
100%. Me too.
right? Like, oh, am I going to get up early and do the workout that I should? No. Oh, now I'm going to have conflict.
Right.
Uh,
Night Rachel and morning Rachel, they're not the same person. Grocery store Rachel and snack time Rachel, they're not the same person either,
no,
right? I can do it.
they're
It's
not.
fine.
Oh, that's magnificent. Um, so what are some things, if I'm a leader listening to this episode and I'm like, wow, I'm starting to see that I could do things differently, that
Mhm.
this is a way I want to go. This is the kind of person I want to be too. What are some practical and immediate steps someone can take to be more human centric?
There are mindset things that
Hmm.
can help you. There are the way that you structure your team things that can
Hmm.
help you. And then there are sort of day-to-day decisions that you can just do immediately. So the first thing I want to just sort of call out as a caveat to the other thing I'm going to recommend, which I'm going to try and be really practical with some of my recommendations. But the thing I want to call out is that some working environments are incredibly difficult.
Hmm.
Some working environments are already set up to let you succeed at doing this. They already get it. And so for people that feel really discouraged right off the bat, like, oh yeah, this is a utopia that like I wish, I want to encourage them by just saying there are micro and macro cultures, and you as a middle manager, meaning you're not the top leader and you're not just like an individual contributor, um, have the most power in an organization to see success and change. You are the make or break thing. And so if you think about your context, your macro culture is the organization, but your micro culture is your team. And what you decide for your team will, in fact, be able to thrive if you decide that that is what you're going to do. And to just give you a different way to contextualize that, micro, macro cultures, you can think of the US as a macro culture
Hmm.
and then Ohio as a micro culture.
Yes.
But you could also think of Ohio as your macro culture and Dayton as your micro culture, right?
Wonderful.
So,
Wonderful
yeah,
metaphor for that. Thank you, Rachel.
yeah, it's right. So you can kind of be your own macro and micro. So put it in context as a leader and don't be discouraged. So the first thing is that you just really have to choose that and then put things into place that allow you to practically do that decision. So, one of the first things that I usually recommend if you decide to do this is mindset things. And those are all the things, honestly, we've already been talking about. Why? What's the data? What's my proof that this could work? What is
Hmm.
the reason that I care about this thing, right? So, just start exploring that. And at the same time, I would think really specifically about creating team values. And
Love
here's
it.
why I think this is really important as like an initial practical step. It forces the leader to think about what are the things that are most important to me in a team that is producing things, and what are the behaviors that must be happening or doing by the members of my team in order to make those values possible. And so for me, I told my team that my team values were the following four things. So I thought a lot about this. I was like, what are the behaviors I want? What are the things I want us to do? And I said, I want my teams to always use the phrases, I'm sorry, I need help, I don't understand, I made a mistake.
Beautiful.
But the reasons that those are my team values is because there's a deeper element here that helps us with business. If my team as a collective unit says I'm sorry, then we take personal responsibility and we're willing to engage with some sort of conflict, even if it's the conflict of me feeling like I have failed someone or failed something, right? So there's that personal shame that you're like kind of offering up, or I've actually offended someone, or I've actually whatever.
Mm-hmm.
If you say, I made a mistake, then there's a different kind of accountability where we can fix something really fast. We're not trying to bury something or try to like prolong people finding out. It's easy to fix when it's just happened, right? Or at least easier usually. I don't understand shows that you're willing to learn and that you're okay with not knowing everything or kind of having a little bit of a humility to how you show up with your team members, right? So these values really indicated other behaviors that I wanted my team to do because I thought that they were the best way to help all of us see a lot of success at a working environment, a working scenario. And so, as a leader, you're going to have different things than me, potentially, for your values. These are not like, a right or wrong kind of situation. Maybe you need to value efficiency or
Mm-hmm.
like detail orientation. Then you should find a way to have, I would not recommend like dozens, but like think about like five. What are the five things that I
Three to
think
five. Yeah.
practically? Yeah, yeah, yeah. Like, let's not get crazy. But like, what are the things that practically my team can hold to be the best version of us, both as the way that we relate to each other, but also get the work done?
Mm-hmm.
Then, this is a really important step. You have to get verbal buy-in from your team members. So you take those to your team and you say, this is what I want us to stand for. This is why I want us to stand for these things. Will you do this with me? And that verbal buy in is really important because when people articulate, they literally say it out loud, it changes what happens in their brain chemistry
Yeah.
from just like passively being like, yeah, that's a good idea to I've committed to this. I will try this. And honestly, I think try is a great word too. Like we as leaders often feel like we have to have all the answers or show up perfectly, especially new managers, because they feel a lot of pressure of like
Yeah.
performance or maybe imposter syndrome, things like that. And I have found that the most gracious employees show up when I tell them, I don't know, I'm going to experiment. Can you experiment with me? And then we do. And there's so much more grace and help in that. So I'd say when you're starting to think really practically about like, I love this idea and I want to do this, how do I do it? Start there. That's a powerful place to start to really get clarity and to know exactly what you're asking your team members to experiment with you.
I love that you brought up clarity too. I think clarity is the foundational leadership skill
Mm.
because it hits everything. Am I clear about purpose? Am I clear about values? Am I clear about expectations, results? And if you do the work to get clear, both mentally and verbally, to your point, I can think about it and talk about it, then you're able to communicate, you're able to align people and choices, set expectations, provide feedback, all of the pieces. I was really struck in your four values. The phrase I wrote down is that human-centric leaders act like humans. I was
Yeah.
wrong. I made a mistake. I don't know. I'm sorry. That is human because
Mhm.
we know that people mess up. We know that we are not perfect. And being humble and authentic about that is the first step. I think if all leadership starts with the leader, it has to. You are the instrument of the work. And if you recognize your own humanity first, then you are able to see it, embrace it, celebrate it, and support it in other people.
Well, I want to add one more thing because I think that you're so right. Like modeling is one of the most powerful ways to
Hmm.
convince other people to do something,
Right.
especially when it's like a cultural change. Like if you reflect it to them, they'll reflect it back to you. But one of the things I've started to talk to organizations about, because I've started to do more of like workshops and things to kind of talk about
Hmm.
culture from a bigger perspective.
Wonderful.
One of the things that I started to really explore is that human-centric leadership, while I talk a lot about management as part of that, because I care deeply about new managers and making sure they have the tools and the middle
Hmm.
management because they're so powerful in change. However, organizations can choose to use this, right? They can choose to look at their organization and say, how can I put structures into place that allow managers to be successful in
Hmm.
human-centric leadership? And that's a whole conversation. But I've also started to talk about how the individual also has the authority and power to be a human-centric leader and manage no one.
Great.
And the way you do that is by doing it to yourself and then reflecting it to your peers. And I have seen that change cultures of teams, change behaviors of interdepartmental, relationships and partnerships. So there is a power here to enable not just an entity, but you yourself. And I think you absolutely nailed that.
Learn first, lead second. That goes from the break room to the boardroom
Mm.
all the way. You talked about, so mindsets, we started with mindsets, values, structures, and decisions. Can you expand on those a little bit, please?
When you're thinking about structures for human-centric leadership, I think about the things that are already going to be naturally occurring. Those are the best things I think to start with.
Hmm.
Um, so PTO is a
Okay,
great example.
great.
There's a lot of companies that still have, here's your 20 days for the year. But there's a lot of companies now that are going towards a different version of RTO, so like requested time off, basically, quote
Hmm.
unquote unlimited, which is never really unlimited, but
No.
it's not a defined amount. And I was very fortunate to work with a company back in 2020 that because of the greater mental strain that was happening for employees as they all migrated to working from home and then, working from home and that period of time felt like it never ended, right? And we didn't have the tools to understand that we had to walk away just because it was, more accessible. And so they instituted a policy that said even though we had requested time off, we had free time off, unlimited, the CEO was like, I need everybody to take a day off every month. Just a free day off. You can
What?
just have it. Consider it extra. And at the time when I was like working with them and leading these teams, I was like, this is so dumb. Like we literally already have unlimited time off.
No.
Like we
But
don't
that
need another fake
unlimited
imaginary
doesn't
day
mean you're
off.
using it. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
beautiful.
But the irony was that I actually think that it was genius now because it enabled me as a manager to then look at my team and not just say, hey, make sure you take your time off, but what day this month are you taking off?
Yes, it's so
When
funny.
will you use that day?
It's so funny. I had this exact conversation with myself this morning. You know how you'll have like these, let me have this philosophical discussion with myself,
Yes,
while
yes.
you're brushing your teeth.
Hmm.
And this is, I was thinking about unlimited time off policies and how they are attractive, but I think they are, I think they're a bit of a trap because
Misleading.
there's, you're going to end up with two ends of the spectrum, people that abuse it and people that don't take any time off. And it's, it should be the other way around, right? The folks that
Hmm.
are not using it, they need the time. The people that are abusing it, why are they even
Should have.
working there? But I had this whole discussion with myself about if I ever end up as a business owner hiring people, I am not going to have unlimited time off. I am going to have mandatory time off.
I love that.
That it's exactly that. You are going to take this much time, say when you're taking it. And if they're,
Yeah.
and that's separate from sick time,
Yes.
right? It's, maybe you get a couple of mental health days because sometimes you just need a day off, but
Hmm.
this is the mandated time. And
Hmm.
maybe the company, shuts the doors for a little bit. for that period. But putting it into, it's not just, oh, we're going to give you time. No, we are going to give you time off because
Yeah.
that is necessary for your wellness and for our productivity and how we work together. Yeah.
Yeah,
I love
exactly.
that the CEO did that. It's beautiful and brilliant. And I know
It was
not every
brilliant.
company has, this is one of the things we're talking in generalities. You've
Hmm.
already acknowledged it. I want to stress it that not every business can do some of the things that we're discussing. The leader
Hmm.
can still make decisions in a human-centric way for a team. Individuals can do that with themselves and their peers, but the mandates of the business, the industry, the particular operation may not make some of this possible.
Hmm.
But that then you're asking, in those cases, you have to ask yourself, how are we compensating for the fact
Hmm.
that we're a 24/7 high risk environment, for example?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so let's dig in on that actually and
Yeah.
say, okay, then what does it look like in different structures that are maybe more restrictive?
Mm-hmm.
So first, remember that, it's similar to like federal and state and how they relate to each other. You can't
Mm-hmm.
just as a state be like, I'm not going to do that federal thing. You have to still comply, but there's ways that you can make additional rules or kind of takes within that
Mm-hmm.
guideline or requirement that allows you to do something different. And so if you have in your company, let's say you have regular PTO. So how do you give your employees more break? How do you enforce take that
Mm-hmm.
time off? Well, what if you said, hey, once a month, once a week, whatever, I want you to go work from home because I want you to just have the ability to show up how you want to show up for that day in your pajamas without, any regard to what you look like, or maybe you have a runny nose, or, whatever the thing is. Maybe you just have a lot of work and you want to be able to be
Mm-hmm.
blaring Metallica while you work. I don't know, like
Yeah.
whatever makes you happy, right? So go work from home for a day. That's something a manager could offer as an
Mm-hmm.
alternative way to rest and restore. Okay, so maybe you don't have that option to do that either. The organization is like, no, 100% in office all the time. Well, I think a really easy way to think about human-centric leadership at its least is to think about this phrase that I use a lot, saying that we are all humans who go to work. We're not workers who go home. And so
Mm.
if your employee must come to work and they're having a hard time, they maybe are experiencing some burnout, maybe they are having a personal life thing that is affecting how much percentage wise they can give to you at a job. As a manager, you still have the ability to clear things, clear the way for them to give 100% of whatever percentage they have to give, and you can allow that to be okay.
Mm-hmm.
And that might look like, hey, why don't you not sit at your desk today, but go find an office to sit in? Or maybe that's,
Beautiful.
hey, I'm going to take this project off for today, or punt it out by a week, or change the deadline, or give you some help, or whatever that looks like, so that you can feel better about showing up 50% for this day or this week or this period of
Mm-hmm.
time, whatever that looks like, right? You have so much more opportunity than it feels sometimes within our structure, depending on what kind of business you're in. And I think that we should search for opportunities to have that sort of empathetic view on the human condition and not forget that at the end of the day, we truly are just human and that is finite.
I I think you're talking about perspective, having the right type of perspective. So, yes, your work is important. I don't want to belittle anyone's job, but is it really like lives are on the line, or this is important for what we do, or this is important because I care about it? And having that perspective and recognizing I can work within certain bounds.
Mhm.
Um, I had an example come to mind for me when I was doing a lot of uh, leadership training. I was in the classroom as a OD consultant. Um, I have depression, I have anxiety, and I had a day where I had just hit a wall. I could not function that day. I was having a little bit of a meltdown, like couldn't stop crying, the whole thing. It
Mhm.
was very inconvenient, to say the least. And I was supposed to teach that day. And I didn't call in. I went in. I was trying my best. My best was not very good that day, to your point. I only had a certain percentage. Um, the woman I worked for was like, we're canceling, you're sick. We're gonna, that's the message. Go home. I was trying to collect myself. She went and got me, there's a coffee shop in the building at the time. She got me a hot tea and a scone and sent me home.
I love that.
That was the most valued and seen I think I have ever felt in my professional career, because I was at one of the lowest points in my mental health. And my health took precedence over the work I had to do that day.
Yeah.
And it was important work, right? Like, you and I talked about this. Training leaders matters. I believe it is essential in the workplace. And the world was not going to end if I didn't teach the class that day. We rescheduled, and the sun rose the next day. And that gift that she gave me, it's been at least 15 years. And I still think about the value of that action and how important it was to choices I've made later on and how I've shown up. I think that's one of the things that when leaders take perspective in that way and they situate the moment or the event in the right context, it can have such far-reaching and long-reaching positive consequences and benefits for people.
Yeah, it's a lovely story, and it's funny because it immediately made me think of my own version of that. And I was having a lot of stuff going on in my life, and very similarly, I mean, I'm not someone who cries very easily. And, in college, I was at this job and where I, helped contract out like the university dormitories when they're not in use, so like usually over the summer and stuff. And so I was working with this woman who was a full-time employee, my boss, and I just was doing my best at my desk to like do the work while basically crying at the same time, right? Like, because that's how it goes. You're like, I get so overwhelmed. The pot is full, so now it spills over. Though, but I'm here, I'm working, I'm doing the thing. And she and I became great friends later on, and still to this day, stay in contact every once in a while. And she told me years later, she was like, I had no idea what to do with you because you were never like this, and you came in and I could see you had such like a struggle. And what she did was she was like, hey, you want to go get us some boba? And sent me out with her car because I didn't have a car at the time. And I had just discovered boba, and it was like one of my favorite things. And she knew that. And honestly, it changed everything about that day. It was like all of a sudden, it was this like weird thing that my boss was like offering to me, but also, how do you say no? And she paid for it. So she was just like, she sent me with the vehicle. She sent me to a place I love. She sent me to, like, and it was just this moment of like joy in a really hard time. And it to this day I remember, and I think that as leaders, we think that it takes something significant in order to have great impact. And in fact, it's often just acknowledgement, being seen, and then being given the space to be whatever we need to be in that moment, and it's okay.
Yeah. I think it's also, you talked a little bit earlier on about some of our biology and the way we are built and made to be in this world. And I've spent a lot of time in this particular comfortable chair talking about how we are wired to connect. And I think sometimes managers have that inkling, that urge to do something like, why don't you go get us some boba? Here's a scone. Funny that they're food examples in both cases. It is my love language.
It is mine as well, to be honest. So
Yeah.
I like it.
But you have that urge, and there is, whether it's doubt or fear,
Mhm.
many managers resist the urge to do the human thing. And I think that is a structural cultural change that could happen, is making it something that's lauded and celebrated when your managers behave like humans. Obviously
Yeah.
my HR past is rearing its head and being like, don't touch people inappropriately. It's like, yes. We all know that we're talking about things that are appropriate and legal and ethical, and we have to allow people to have that human compass that tells them this is going to connect to this person.
Mm-hmm.
And if you've got somebody that doesn't have the ability to discern that, probably shouldn't be in leadership.
I agree. Yeah. That's a great indication that they're not ready.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I saw a statistic recently. I hope I really don't butcher this, but it's like 1 in 5, I think 1 in 5 managers had no demonstrated proficiency to be good at it when they
Wow.
became a manager. And so I think about that too, because we truly are all wired differently. And I think for people that don't, okay, here's the thing I love about human-centric leadership. If you don't care about people and you only care about profit, this is a winning formula. I can give you all the statistics, all the numbers, all the data, so that you could present it to someone and be like, hey, we should do this human-centric approach because we will literally retain more of our money.
Mm-hmm.
I'm fine with that. I am totally fine with that because there are people where their world is wired where that's what they prioritize. And I think that in looking at the mass entity of being in management or becoming a leader, we are going to have a mixed bag of people that have different priorities for
Mm-hmm.
what is important in an organizational structure, which is also, calling back why I think you should define your team values. Because if your value is we need to make our goals every quarter, and that's one of your primary, like actual values, that means you need to be hiring different kinds of people potentially.
Mm-hmm.
That means you need to be having different kinds of conversations. And again, that's not my style, but that is an appropriate way to lay expectations. And so having 1 in 5 people demonstrating that they don't have any proficiency to actually be a manager is concerning to me because that means we're not even doing the basic checks and balances to make sure that our organizations are able to succeed in the most basic function of being able to get people to perform. Because if you're looking for just the dollar, then you need to be hiring people
Mm-hmm.
that allow other people to do a good job.
Well, let's talk about the person that prioritizes making goals or profits every quarter. Ask why. Maybe it's because we run on a crazy lean margin, and anytime we miss, I have to cut a position. So I am laser focused on making our numbers so I can retain every person on this team. Awesome. Let's go make the numbers.
Right.
So I think there's also a nuance there when we have the people versus profit. Profit's not a bad thing. Businesses that don't have profits don't have people. So
yeah, they don't have a business.
Yeah. So none of this is to say that don't worry about profit, don't worry about your revenue, just focus on the people. You have to focus on both.
Correct.
It's what do you put as the centerpiece for how you're thinking, structuring, and making decisions.
That's right. And that's where we fully came into a circle of why I have defined human-centric leadership as such, is because paradoxical thinking is a formula for success, and profits and people are not at odds.
Nope.
They are simply a path to the same goal.
Yes.
And when you prioritize the human, make that the center thing on your path to those results, you balance the scale so that both things can thrive and be possible.
Couldn't say it better myself, Rachel. So you mentioned that you're writing a book. Want to hear more about that? I want to give you a chance to tell us some about it. And then I'd also like to know if there are any other resources that you'd recommend.
Absolutely. So I'll do the shameless plug first.
Please, please.
I'm really excited about this book. I'm hoping that it's something that people can read for thought fodder. If you even absorb 5% of what's in there, I'm going to consider that wildly successful. And so this book is called Being Human-Centric. It's a leader's guide to culture, people, and
Hmm.
profits, and really lays out the case from a monetary perspective. What's the ROI for doing this? But also, what's the way that I actually implement this in an organization in order to be an effective and human-centric leader? You can already sign up on the wait list on my website, thehumancentricleader.com.
Great.
And on the website, I also have lots of resources for people on how do I do conflict? How do I
Hmm.
be a manager? How do I be a centric leader, a human-centric leader? All kinds of things there too that they can explore. Some of them are free, some of them are courses. But that's a great place to go if you're looking for something a little bit more about this topic. When I widen the view, I've learned a lot from different experts in the field. Brene Brown is one of my
Yes.
favorites. She has a book, Dare to Lead. It talks a lot about what the science says around how to lead well. And a lot of the things she talks about, I think, have a really nice pairing with human-centric behavior and tools that you can use. And then, of course, I would be remiss if I didn't say my all-time favorite person. I have a little bit of a crush. Simon Sinek. He is just I just every time I hear him talk, I'm just like, ah, more good things to consider about. Really,
Hmm.
it's less about leaders, in my opinion, and more about like be better humans.
Hmm.
And so I tend to read a lot of his stuff, and right now he's on a real big kick with like what does a friend relationship look like, and
Hmm.
how is that valuable to people in all scenarios. And it's been a really fantastic way to think about that within the working culture. I mean, they say that the number one way to stay longevity in a company is by making your one single work friend.
Yep. I have a best friend
So
at
there you go.
work.
There you go.
That is, I I actually had my best friend, whom I met at work, on the podcast last year to talk about
I
that
love that.
topic.
Oh, what fun.
Yeah, but it is. Those relationships matter. They help us
Yeah.
thrive. They help us connect to our purpose. They help us get work done.
Hmm.
And I also have a nerd crush on Simon Sinek. Yes. And that's how I
I love it.
classify those. There are a few people that it's total nerd crush. I love them for
Yeah,
their minds and the
exactly.
work they do. Simon Sinek and Joseph Grenny as well. And I
Excellent
think
choice.
the people from Vital Smarts, the crucial learning, crucial conversations, crucial
Hmm.
accountability,
Hmm.
their whole portfolio
It's fantastic.
fits into this same conversation,
Hmm.
particularly around do hard things to get better results with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good. So that company was kind of my outstanding one, especially when it comes to really trying to work on being comfortable with conflict. And then I found the Gottman Institute, and they've done a lot of research and science as well.
Okay.
The Gottmans, one is like a psychologist, one is a different kind of doctor. I don't know. Um, and they also have recently done a lot of study on conflict and what you can do and how you can
Hmm.
just like make that a little bit more accessible when it feels so overwhelming. And so that's a great, yeah, those are also great recommendations.
Wonderful. Any final thoughts, ma'am? I feel like you have done such a beautiful job of summating everything we've talked about in the last few minutes. I don't want to rehash anything, but I do want to offer you the opportunity if there are any final big ideas that you want to share.
I have just absolutely loved this conversation. I feel like we've hit some really like encouraging conversations, which I don't always get to hit on
Hmm.
in podcasts and speaking and things. And so I think the thing I'd love to leave with listeners is, doing human-centric leadership in its fullest form, like in the way that I'm talking about it, the book, the things, the idea is like it can be really overwhelming.
Hmm.
And I would say, if you want to do this, if you want to try it, don't feel like you have to eat a whole elephant for one meal.
Yes.
You know, one bite. just take one bite and just test it out and baby steps over time.
Mm-hmm.
I think they say 1% change over a year is actually like 30% change overall or something like that. But the point is, even though it feels really small to you, it can make a really significant impact very quickly over a course of time. And so I would just encourage people to pick something small and just try it a little bit at a time.
Boba, right?
Boba.
Something small that makes a very big difference. Absolutely delightful. Thank you so much, Rachel.
Yeah, thank you, Kate. It was really fun.
Yeah, it has been. Has been a lot of fun. Thank you for joining me in the comfy chairs. If you're enjoying this podcast, don't forget to subscribe and share it with others who are passionate about leading and learning. And don't forget, if you have a question for our Comfy HQ series, I'd love to hear it. Check out the link in the show notes to submit your question and be part of the conversation. Until next time.